presentation was okay, but that thought you had?
When companies work human, people stay through anything.
Your quick thinking saved us. You saw something. It changed everything. You may think we don't see you, but I'm so glad you were the one in the room with me.
When people are recognized, they feel seen. They feel they belong.
Good job.
Because without the human, it's just work.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar today titled Wellbeing in the Workplace. I'm really excited for this. So I'll start out by introducing myself. My name is Misha Ann Martin, and I am an industrial organizational psychologist. I like to say all the time that I am fanatically passionate about how people experience work. So my career has been all about employee experience and how we measure and improve that. And I've been doing this work for close to 20 years. I have done this work in a number of different industries and worked for companies like Flex and JetBlue. Currently, I work for WorkHuman, and my role is Senior Director, People Analytics and Research. I co-lead a team that focuses on proving the impact of positive work experiences, both for individuals and their organizations. I am joined today by Sheila Champion-Smith. Sheila is the global head of well-being at Cisco, and she is responsible for developing a global well-being strategy that drives a conscious culture of holistic well-being for leaders, teams, and individuals at Cisco. Sheila joined Cisco in 2000 and has held various roles in people and communities, formerly known as HR. During her time in people and communities, she has been responsible for leading the EMEAR Total Rewards team with oversight of compensation and benefits offering across 65 countries, ensuring they're compliant, market relevant, and aligned with the global reward philosophy and strategy that supports Cisco's purpose to power on inclusive future for all. She has also led implementation of Total Rewards technology platforms and delivered on mergers and acquisitions. Proud winner of Excellence in Wellbeing for the Great Place to Work survey, Sheila is passionate about embedding a holistic and inclusive well-being strategy. I am so excited to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Misha, and that's amazing. It's such a wonderful introduction, and it makes me feel pretty special for hearing all those things, so thank you for that. It's so good to be here with you today as well.
Well, you are pretty special, and you know, we're humans, so we like to talk about the humans. So now I'll give a personal intro. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am as a person. I think the most important thing to know is that I was born and raised in Jamaica, and my family is super important to me, and I am so grateful for my grandparents who made all these sacrifices so that I could be here today. And a fun fact, canned sardines are my guilty pleasure, and I hate tuna. How about you, Sheila?
I love that intro. So myself, I was born in Germany, actually, but I've lived in the UK most of my life since I was 3 years old. And, you know, I've kind of traveled the world, which I just find phenomenal that I've been able to do that with Cisco, talking about well-being. Little fun fact about me, I've played hockey all my life. I mean, I have to say I'm nearing the age of 50, and I have had to give it up because it got too tough on my knees. But field hockey is what I've been playing all my life. I'm very passionate about that. I love mangoes and hate bananas, though, Misha Ann.
I had a banana just this morning, but I also love mangoes. All right, so let's get to the topic of well-being. So many people are talking about that right now, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. And, you know, I said before, I'm a psychologist. I love construct definitions. So before we really get into this complex topic that has so many different aspects to it, I want to make sure that we're on the same page when we talk about well-being. So for everybody listening, I want you to think about, what does well-being mean to you? And then Sheila, I want you to tell everybody, what do you mean when you say well-being?
Yeah, I think it is a great question. And I honestly think it is all about understanding what it is to each and every individual. Because well-being to me is life. And therefore, everybody's life is so uniquely different. And it's the things that happen to us in life as well and how we react to them, which is what well-being is all about ultimately. It's everything that we have from physical well-being, emotional well-being, social well-being, and financial well-being. But, you know, really, to make it even simpler, as I say, it's about life. It's how we bounce back to things that happen within our life and the resiliency that we can build. And well-being ultimately from a corporate perspective and companies, as they think about it, means what are you doing to equip your employees to have the tools to be able to bounce back and build the resilience. So that's really what it is to me. I like to keep things simple. And, you know, ultimately I'm passionate about people, and that is why well-being is so important to me as well. And I think the other thing just to mention about it, Mishan, is that, you know, different people will need different things at different times. And recognizing that when we talk about well-being is so important. So that's kind of how I think about it, I guess. But yeah, hopefully we're on the same page as that. And as we get into the discussion, it's going to get quite exciting as we think about it as well. So
we are absolutely on the same page. I do love that you mentioned, you know, unique and individual needs, and, you know, it changes based on what you're going through. We'll get into a lot of research today because both, you know, Cisco and WorkHuman we both have done research in this space. And what we're finding is that, you know, well-being looks different based on race, gender, stage of life, caregivers, that sort of thing. And so I love that you're calling out that it's different for different people. So I want us to get deeper into that definition and talk about what's happening at Cisco and the work you have done at Cisco to understand well-being and its impacts in the workplace.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, again, a lot of organizations will probably do well-being surveys or employee surveys. And, you know, we were doing the same thing. And thankfully, over the past 5 years, we've really placed a huge importance on measuring the well-being and the impact of well-being on engagement and also career satisfaction as well, Mishan. So what we looked at, we did some external research and also some internal research. And we basically came up with this understanding that the areas that we need to ask people about in their well-being, their personal well-being, which means how I'm doing, and then your social well-being, which is how we're doing. So hopefully you can see here on the slide some of the things that we know about here as you look at this is those with the highest well-being are actually more fully engaged in an organization. They're also more positive about their experience at Cisco than they would be about any other organization. They check in more frequently, and what that means is they're checking in with their manager and their teammates more frequently, and also they receive more attention. So when you're taking care of your well-being, you'll actually be receiving more attention from your manager as well. We also know that every person is different, and there's things that will happen in life, as I mentioned before, and some people are struggling more than others. So caregivers, you mentioned earlier, I'll touch on that a little bit later about my personal experience as well in that space. People, leaders, and also women. We know that all of those people are struggling. I think as leaders in organizations, there is so much being put on leaders, managers in organizations as individuals, but also as in the expectations of them now as leading a team, needing to understand the changes in the environment, the economic situation. It's like being a leader is tough right now, I have to say. So that's where we start. And, you know, I can talk a little bit deeper about the areas that we ask around personal well-being at Cisco. We talk about, you know, we ask people, I have a healthy routine, and they score it on a scale of 1 to 5. I successfully manage my work-related stress, for example. We also ask people to scale themselves on I have a healthy sleep schedule. So we're kind of looking at sleep. We're looking at locus of control, we're looking at mental health, physical health, and that's the personal well-being side of things, how I'm doing. And then the social well-being, how we're doing, that links to the career piece a little bit more, is we ask people, are you good at asking for help? We also ask them how connected they are to their team, which is really interesting to hear more about. The other question we ask is, I know for sure I'll be here in 2 years' time. I mean, again, it gives you some really interesting data that you can correlate with the personal well-being side of things too. And what we know out of all of this is that well-being basically explains engagement. which in turn explains retention at Cisco. So when people are focusing on their engagement, we're seeing them when people are focusing on their well-being, we see they're more engaged, and we also know they're more likely to stay at the organization, which is something we'd like to have.
You are making my researcher heart so happy. There are a couple of things that you said there that, aligns with things I talk about, the importance of that relationship with your manager and managers checking in on people, not just what people are doing for the organization, but on people themselves. I talk a lot about psychological safety and the importance of that for being able to ask for help when you need it. So I want to go back to caretakers and caregivers. Last year, I had the absolute honor, was it this year? The time is moving so fast. I had the honor of sitting on a panel with Alexandra Drain, and she is the CEO and co-founder of a group called Archangels. And that group is all about providing support to caregivers and advocacy for caregivers. And they've done quite a bit of research that I want to reference now, because I remember when I was hearing about it on the panel, it just really struck me as to, in some cases, how underserved this group is. And so they did research in 2021, and out of that research, they found that 43% of adults are caregivers. So quite a lot of us have some degree of caregiving responsibility. Of that 43%, 70% reported an adverse mental health symptom. So that's things like anxiety, depression, even suicidal thoughts. 23% are sandwich caregivers. And what that means is that they're both caring for somebody who is under 18 and somebody who is over 18. And for this group, over half of them reported having recent suicidal thoughts. So that was really compelling to me in terms of, when people are showing up at work that have these challenges, how much support are we giving? How much empathy do we even know? As leaders, do we even have the relationship with somebody to know that they are struggling in this way? I also want to think about work flexibility in this context. So we did a study in 2021, and part of what we asked about was people intending to look for a new job within a year, similar to the Cisco survey. And what we found is that 65% of those people were parents, so they were caregivers. And one of the top reasons people gave for looking for a new job was a desire for more flexibility. So I think it's possible that people who are caregivers, flexibility may be a way to better manage the demands of work and the demands of caregiving as well.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I have a bit of a personal situation going on at the moment, Misha, but I think, when you talk about flexibility as well, I honestly believe that all of us need a level of flexibility right now because, again, there's just so many, more and more people I talk to are talking about issues that they're dealing with in their personal life that obviously runs into our work life as well. And I think where I see people that have no flexibility in their career and their work life, it significantly impacts them in that personal situation as well. And it takes longer for them to recover and to be able to deal with the situation they're dealing with personally, but also from a work perspective, it's so hard to bounce back and be productive and resilient at work too. So I think flexibility in organizations is key. And I think there's a bit of a myth around it, Misha, around where people, sometimes I think that when you give people flexibility, they are going to just take it too far. Mm-hmm. And I think in most circumstances, 99%, I would say that the more flexibility you give to someone, the more they'll give back to an organization. So that's just my personal perspective. I have many discussions with my family members about it who run businesses as well. But, I do think it's key. And just from the caregiving perspective, that data you share is kind of a little bit difficult for me. So 15 weeks ago now, my mother-in-law, who lives with us here, in our house. We recently moved on the south coast of England, and she came in to live with us. She's 79 years old, pretty fit, quite honestly, but she fell down the stairs and she broke her leg in 2 places. And so literally, myself and my wife, we turned into caregivers literally overnight, and we had a whole new role to play. We couldn't leave the house together at all. We had to be here for her every single moment of every day. I share that because the statistics that you've just shared there, I understand, and the mental drain and strain it puts on the individuals who are caring, the person who is actually in the situation needing the care, is really huge. And then the relationship aspect of the carers is also incredibly significant, and it does have an effect. And I think, again, it comes to what's the toolkit that we're giving our people in organisations to be able to deal with these difficult situations, to help them ask for help. But also sometimes it's about just being able to share sometimes how difficult it is, and recognising when perhaps I need a little bit of a break, or I need to go for my sea swim in the morning, or I just need to do something that's going to be for me so that I can be there for my mother-in-law as well. So it's a tough time at the moment, and the data and statistics just shows that we need to think about this in a different way. And I'm glad it's been coming to the forefront. And I think at Cisco, when we asked people as well, I think 43% was actually the similar figure that we got as to the number of caregivers that we have in the organisation. And that sandwich kind of around people caring for parents as well as caring for children is, again, and from a cultural perspective across the globe, that shows up even more in some places than others as well. And I think where you have a global team recognising that and that people may be in that situation is just so important.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sheila. I know sometimes it can be difficult to be vulnerable like that, but I really hope that, hearing your story empowers somebody else to share their own and to request additional support when they need it. I say very often that when people show up to work as their best selves and feel like they can do that, businesses thrive. And fortunately, we have the data to prove that. So we recently did some research with Gallup, and out of that research looked at the relationship between well-being and business, specifically the relationship between well-being and recognition and how that benefits the business. So we looked at responses from over 12,000 employees across 12 different countries, and we looked at how employee recognition and well-being is associated with each other across 4 different dimensions that we looked at. So we looked at how that impacted somebody's overall life evaluation, how that impacted burnout, how that impacted the person's daily emotion, and also how it impacted social well-being. So happy to see the parallels between how we think about it and how Cisco thinks about it. So here's what we found. In terms of overall life evaluations, employees were 2 times as likely to evaluate their lives and their futures positively when they felt like their well-being was taken care of. In terms of burnout, employees are 90% less likely to report being burned out at work, always, or very often. Improved daily emotions. Employees who report having experienced a lot of gratitude the previous day are 40% less likely to have experienced a lot of stress, worry, and sadness. So there's a relationship between gratitude and your daily emotions. And then lastly, better social well-being. Employees are 7 times as likely to strongly agree that they have meaningful connections or a best friend at work, and as much as 10 times as likely to strongly agree that they belong.
I mean, those data points, again, are just so significant, and it just helps, I think, organizations think about where are the areas that you need to really, focus on. Burnout is a topic that's talked about all the time. I mean, there's just so many articles out there that you can read about it. I do find it difficult sometimes, actually, when it is talked about, because I think burnout as a term actually means that you've really got to a significant point in your life where you just can't even function anymore. And so there are these, and I like the terminology around levels of burnout because I also think it's to do with overwhelm and stress. But we know that when well-being is being looked at and taken care of at the individual level, the leader level, and the team level, then all of these things become so much easier for people to navigate. The life evaluation piece, I mean, how much did that come about through the pandemic? Obviously, the Great Resignation has been talked about, and I think people did, take stock and think about what is it that I need in life. And I think you can only do that when you are taking care of yourself as well. So I love all those points that you brought up there, Miss Sharon. Thank you.
Yeah. So just to be clear, for our listeners, when people feel recognized and grateful, they have better outcomes in terms of well-being, and that affects their daily emotions, how they perform at work, how they feel about work, and how they feel about their overall lives. So now I want us to get to the specific area of this conversation where we talk about what people and organizations can do. And this is my favorite part of any conversation because I'm like, all right, we can talk, but what do we do in order to promote well-being? So Sheila, what do you suggest?
I think this is almost the challenge that we have because there's so much you can do. So what I always suggest is keep it simple, keep it accessible, and keep it actionable. And what I mean by that is to embed a conscious culture of well-being, it clearly needs to live in the day-to-day activities that we all do. So a lot of us are obviously behind the camera all day, every day. What's the home setup that people have? Do they have access to connect with people on a regular basis for that social well-being you touched upon? Are they able to connect with their teams in a way that they can have deeper conversations, not just about work, but about their personal lives? One of the things that a number of our leaders do here in Cisco, I mean, in general, people will join a team meeting, if not once a week, then at least once a month. And in those team meetings, it's really important sometimes to go around the room and ask, what's one personal thing that's going on for you right now, and what's one professional thing that's happening for you? And do you need any help from any of the team in each of those areas? It's just a great way for leaders to engage with the team and for team members feel like they have a connected place to be open and safe to share what's going on for them. So I think the other thing is around leaders and what they're doing to role model healthy behaviors and how they're sharing that. And I think one of the areas that I think none of us do well enough is what are we doing for downtime? What are we doing to take breaks away from work? And I think that leaders, again, should role model this. And I think sometimes people are afraid to say, I'm taking a break.
Yeah.
And, I'm over here in Europe, and we like to take at least 2-week breaks. I know my colleagues in the US are sometimes only 1 week. And it's like, goodness me, if I'm taking 10 days, that's like I'm having a massive holiday. I'm like, wow. But people need breaks from work, whether they're small or long. And I think that, sometimes this is just not focused on enough. So again, leader role modeling, so setting boundaries. So what is it you as an individual need to do? But if you can't set boundaries and not share them, so unless you share openly about what's going on for you, it's just incredibly difficult. So that's one of the things. And I think we'll touch on inclusive communities as well a little bit later too.
Yeah. So I want to say a little bit more about 2 things you mentioned. So first of all, it's confession time. I'm really bad about getting up from this chair and getting out of this office and even getting out of my house. But yesterday was a triumph. I actually got up from my desk and I walked to a restaurant in my neighborhood and I met friends for lunch. And I also sent a picture of that to my team. So now I'm feeling extra good about it because I'm like, ooh, I was modeling wellness behaviors. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. You really were. And thanks for sharing that because that is like such a great specific example of where you've done it for yourself. You felt good about it, but you've shared it too. And I think that, again, just like finding small ways to do that is so important. The other thing about taking time out, I think, again, it's like really catching yourself to say, oh, yeah, I finished on a Friday afternoon and I went off and did this with my family. Generally, people then say, oh, but don't worry, I got back on my work at later in the evening. Yeah. And I'm like, can you just stop at that? I finished early and I went with my family.
Good point. Good point. The other thing I want to pick up on is what you talked about, in terms of embedding wellness into your culture. And I want to share an example of how one of our clients did this successfully using their recognition program. So the client is Canadian Automobile Association, CAA, and they adopted a wellness at work program called Sprout. And so what you do in Sprout is you log your wellness activities. And if you log enough wellness activities, you get a badge. I think you can get a bronze badge, a silver badge, and a gold badge. But then they integrated this with their recognition program through WorkHuman. And so if you got a badge, then you got an award for that badge with points associated with it that you could then redeem for merchandise in our catalog. So not only did individuals get points, right, and some kind of reward for the wellness activity, they got recognition, which means that that behavior is positively reinforced. We have a social feed, so it amplified the wellness behavior so that others could see it and congratulate it. The other thing about integrating recognition and wellness is that when people do healthy things together, like a group runs a marathon or something like that, you can also celebrate and amplify that behavior. And then also, I just want to mention that we were able to do some preliminary research on this. And actually what we found is that badge holders had significantly lower turnover compared to non-badge holders. So well-being and recognition seems to be a very natural fit here.
I mean, it really is. And I mean, there's an example we have today, actually, in our recognition portfolio that I just literally did myself. So something popped up in one of our spaces, and it asked me to send a note of gratitude to somebody. And it's a recognition for them sort of excelling in the behaviors that we expect around embodying the brand or, really embracing the future. And so what I was able to do is recognize somebody that pings them a message that also then allows them to pass on that recognition to someone else. But what's weaved into it is we also give the opportunity for money to be given to charities. So charities that we've set up in Cisco. So when I'm giving a token of recognition, basically I'm also contributing to a charity that we're all backing behind. And then somebody else gets that token of recognition, they pass it on as well. It's just a wonderful way. And the feeling that you get when you just get a recognition, a badge or whatever it is, like it really makes you feel good. So I completely agree, this connection between well-being and recognition is just so important. And of course, it feels good when you recognize someone too. So yeah.
Now let's bring inclusion into the conversation. So I'll start with a story, and then I'll start with a little bit of research as well. Earlier this year, I had the honor and privilege of facilitating a panel discussion that included Dwayne Richards, our anti-racism facilitator, Dr. Bernice King, daughter of Martin Luther King, and Renee Myers, who is the head of diversity and inclusion at Netflix. And it was not too long after the Buffalo shootings. And, at the beginning of the conversation, I was just checking in with the panel and asking them how they were and what they wanted people in the audience to know. And Dwayne said, one thing I need for you to know is that mental health for people of color does not look the same. And he said 4 years ago, almost to the day, I tried to kill myself because of racism. By all rights, I shouldn't be here. And you could hear a pin drop in the audience. Talk about being brave and vulnerable and real. And he talked about, all the things that he had to do to make sure that he made it home safe at night, and all the things that, he encountered that have a negative impact on his mental health. And then the research side of that, we did some research with Gallup, as I mentioned before, and we looked at, as we talked about before, this idea of thriving. So one of the things we found was that Black and Hispanic employees in our sample were less likely to agree that they were equitably recognized, and that had a disproportionate impact on their lives compared to their white counterparts. So essentially, there is a relationship between recognition and people feeling like they're thriving in the rest of their lives. And this relationship is especially strong for people of color. So when you get this right for people, it makes a difference, particularly people who are struggling for other reasons.
It's just such a critical topic, Isharan, and I think that, everything you shared there is just like, it's just so impactful. And I think stories are like just so important to bring it to life for organizations and for the rest of the population, because sometimes people just don't know where to start. And they don't know where to start the conversation. So, this level of proximity that you need to have with different communities, I think is incredibly important. And I think it's also about understanding that well-being is not the same for everybody. And almost as an organization, what you put out there in your offerings, your resources and your support, is making sure that you're being inclusive. It's making sure you're being inclusive with the programs that you have available from let's just say the employee assistance program that you might have. A lot of companies have that in place, where you might have counseling available for people. What are we doing to make sure the counselors are actually, going to be the right fit, the right match for everybody across the organization, and how do you make that even happen? So I think that there is such an importance that needs to be played in this. And, I know we have a number of inclusive communities. I think some people call them employee resource groups or organizations in their company. And for me right now, as Global Head of Wellbeing, I don't assume anything that I know what somebody needs for their well-being. Yeah. But what I do make sure that we do is listen to what are the needs that each of these communities have. So we worked with our Connected Black professionals recently, and we were talking about financial well-being, which is a huge topic right now, but understanding what is it that actually the Connected Black professional community needs with regards to financial well-being, because there's a different lens, I think, Misharan, that, we could talk about, perhaps today, that helps you think about here's financial well-being for some people, here it is for another. And again, it's just not the same for everyone. Yeah. And also we work with our Pride team, and I'm going to be presenting and joining the Pride team soon, which is going to be amazing. But I think just communities in general and understanding and meeting people where they're at is just so important, Misharan. Completely agree.
I love that you talked about, financial well-being being different for different people. As I mentioned when I started about my grandparents and the sacrifices they made, I mean, you go back a couple of generations and my family was really, really struggling, and I'm an immigrant, right? And so financial well-being for me doesn't look the same as it does for other people. When you think about immigrants and people coming from impoverished circumstances, you have to think about some people taking care of the rest of their families. It's not the same. So thank you so much for mentioning and acknowledging that. So before I get to key takeaways, is there anything else you want our listeners to know about, think about, do about well-being?
I think the really important thing for me is it has to be about keeping it simple. It has to be the fact that every single human being across the world has 24 hours every single day. And each and every one of us have the opportunity to be aware of the choices that we make in each of those moments of our day. And what are they doing that's going to have a positive impact on themselves? But what are we doing that's going to have a positive impact on other people? And so conscious choices, I think, is like such a critical thing to be thinking about as we navigate this complex world that we live in and the complexities that happen to us as human beings in life. And so it's about taking ownership for ourselves, but also taking ownership for others as well. I think the other thing as leaders I'd just love to touch on is about compassionate leadership.
Ooh, I love that.
And I think, because I think that, there's this level of, you can be empathetic and, put yourself in someone else's shoes and really feel for them. But actually, you really need to think about what are you doing to help them understand what is it that they need from you right now. So the compassion side of leadership is so critical right now. And I think that, again, giving a little bit of space for leaders to also think about their own well-being, and then what are they doing to be compassionate for their people, to allow them to just honestly live a better life in organizations as well. So a couple of things there, Mishan, that I'd just love to share and I'm just passionate about as well. But it's taking care of yourself to take care of those around you is really the bottom line of it all.
Perfect. All right, so let's wrap up this conversation with some key takeaways. Takeaway number one, well-being can create the conditions for people to thrive. People do better when they feel better. So if you can help people feel better by attending to their well-being needs, they'll do better and businesses will thrive. Takeaway number two, well-being supplies people with opportunities to learn, grow, and support each other, and in so doing, unlock their full potential. When you ask for support, receive support, give support, it creates community, and people do not readily leave their communities. This could be why we're finding some of the relationships with retention. Takeaway number three, when work is at its best, so are employees, and so are bottom line. Sheila, I just want to say thank you so much for your passion, for your vulnerability, and for your knowledge. It has been my honor to host this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ms. Joanne. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, let's go to Q&A. Thank you so much for joining us. And not only did you show up, but you have been engaging in the chat, and I am so grateful for that and so happy to see that. I saw the Caribbean representation as well. I see you, Trinidad. Also, I saw a question about the stats I shared on caregivers. If you go to Archangels, ARCH, angels, all one word, .me/insights, you will see those stats that I shared, as well as some more in-detail research done by that organization. All right, so let's go to the questions. All right, Sheila, Kissa said, I am very interested in the tools and questions that Cisco is using with its staff. Will any of this information be shared with us?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mishan. And as you say, great to see so much interaction in the chat there. And a fellow ex-colleague at Cisco, Laura, thanks for the shout out, as well as, I think it was Cheryl, who used to be a field hockey player and played in Trinidad. I wish I'd done that. I haven't done that yet. Maybe a goal to achieve at some point, Mishan. But yeah, so the research that we've done, I mean, we basically would love more companies to actually use the same scale that we're looking at and the wellbeing items that I talked about in the personal and social wellbeing. So I'm sure we're going to be sharing the slides after this. So happy for people to look into that and keep following what we're doing here at Cisco around the wellbeing research. We've done some really great external literature reviews to look at what are those elements that we should be measuring. But wouldn't it be cool if we were all measuring the same items and then pulled the data together at some point to look across our different companies to see what's really going on in the world? Because we see some fascinating things within Cisco. But yeah, happy to share.
Yes, you have been so generous with those items. Thank you so much for that. I know that we've personally recommended to other clients of ours who are interested in well-being to use those same questions. So yeah, hopefully, we'll have some idea of how people are doing on those items in different countries, in different industries, and all over the world. All right. Do you think that people who are excited to engage in these programs like Sprout are intrinsically motivated to engage in community? There always seems to be an offshoot of people who think engaging in these things are silly. How do we bring those people on board?
Wow, fabulous question, Misha, and I'd love to get your views as well. I think, I think well-being is always a topic that some people are like, well, that's not for me. And as I shared at the beginning, my kind of view around what well-being is, I don't know how it can't be for everybody, because it literally is about life and how you navigate life. I think it's about helping people understand that it's a fundamental need to focus on the topic of well-being, and then recognition and the programs that are tied to that. And gratitude and being thankful in the moment again, they're natural human traits that we all should have. So again, I think it's about making it real for some of these people. Some other folks in our organisation in different functions also want the data. And so I love the way that you share the data as well. It's about meeting people where they're at, so understanding the audience and giving a bit of a mix of the context setting around these topics. I think that's absolutely key. So the science fascinates some people. Some people just want to have a bit of a challenge and get excited about coming together and a bit of social well-being. What do you think, though, Misha-Ann? Any thoughts? Your view?
I think we're in the age of tracking anyway, right? Like I've got my Apple Watch and I do Tory on my phone. And I think we're in this age where there are more people who naturally want to know their own statistics than before. But also I think this is the brilliance of pairing it with something like recognition, because every human being loves recognition. We've done tons of research on it, and there is no one that appreciation doesn't work for, you know? And so some people, you know, might not be natural trackers, but when you say, hey, if you track enough, you get the point. Some people might do it for the points, right? But then in the middle of tracking and the points, there's this appreciation that creates this positive feeling. What we know from our research is that that keeps people doing it, right? Because now all of your coworkers are saying, wow, well done, congratulations, and you get points. So I think that that is a natural go together, because those two things can encourage non-natural trackers to get into this tracking behavior. And as we know from science, the combination of that tracking and that appreciation, those two things work really well to turn wellness behaviors into habits that are repeated.
Absolutely.
All right, next question. For the type X folks who believe that people will take advantage of flexibility, how can we show them that that's often not accurate? Amy to go stats.
Wow. I don't know what you have to go stats. I know that, you know, we've done a number of things around obviously looking at a hybrid work study we've done, and we know that ultimately out of that study, 73% of people are feeling happier and more motivated in their role. So I think, you know, there was another question I think that came in around, you know, I think it was something around, you know, what do you do when you don't feel comfortable to be able to take a walk at lunchtime or even take a lunch break, it felt like. And it was like, I don't know how you can't like do those things in order to actually be productive and have sustainable productivity as well. I think, you know, it's just critical that we have to have this element of flexibility that allows people to really focus on what they need personally to be able to meet their professional goals as well. But I do know that, you know, many leaders and many businesses are skeptical around this. It's like, well, how do I know what you're really doing at home? But this comes down to trust. It comes around to a safe environment. It comes around to a culture of success as well. And actually how you're recognizing people and how you're perhaps measuring leadership expectations. What's the role modeling behavior as well? So I think it comes back to that role model topic as well, Misha-Ann. Anything else you would add to some of that as well?
Yes, absolutely. So in another organization, we also did research on people who are working remotely. And what we found was that they were our highest performers. Here at WorkHuman, we've done research on, you know, different ways people work and how that pans out in terms of their likelihood to be burned out. And what we found is that people who are working hybrid were not as burned out, because there's that idea that you have better control over balance. So just to reflect some of what you said as well, I think as long as people have clear expectations and there's an agreement on what exactly it is that you're supposed to accomplish, you can kind of let everything go and let people manage themselves accordingly. But as you said, you know, there's some trust required for that.
Yeah, building trust and some, you know, kind of exercises and how people are checking in with each other from a leader and team perspective to understand, you know, how you're actually doing, what you're achieving, and various tools that help you navigate that, I think is really important.
Okay, in light of our new work landscape and some people remaining in person while others have various stages of working remotely, How can approaches to well-being incorporate different modalities? Also, what are some tangible ways to combat people getting less attention when they may not physically be in an office space?
Yeah, the complexities of, I guess, the hybrid world of work. And, you know, we know that sometimes, you know, if you're in person, you're getting the attention from the people there and the leaders there. So, you know, what do you do for those people that are remote? And this is all about actually awareness. I think awareness is absolutely key here. So I was running a session actually in person in Poland just a few months ago. What I found super interesting is we had a number of people within the room, and then we had a number of people on our WebEx technology, and people were, you know, kind of talking to us from there. I actually felt that the experience virtually was better than in the room, because I could actually have direct conversations with somebody like looking at me on the screen, whereas I couldn't look at everybody in the room face to face and get to know them properly. So I think it's really interesting in, you know, just looking at the environment that you're in, understanding the audience again, who's the people in person in the room, and how are you regularly connecting into the technology, if you have the technology set up to be able to have that experience. And where you don't, I think, again, it's how are people being heard and how are people being seen? And so bringing people into the conversation, and, you know, where somebody is sitting on a meeting and hasn't said a word, it's like, what's the value for that individual and then for the group of people there, because they haven't heard their voice and they haven't been able to give their voice. So again, I think really thinking about what's the actual work that we're wanting people to do, and how are you engaging people both in the room and virtually, but thinking about it. And the manager, again, has to play a big role in making sure that they're setting up people for success, whether it's both in person or virtually. And I think sometimes bringing people together is what is needed and wanted at the moment. And we're hearing a lot of that here at Cisco, is that, you know, leaders want teams to come back in just for that social connection, actually. But again, you have to just also, because we've lived in this world now for a few years, we have to be respectful of people's boundaries and commitments that they perhaps have at home, or perhaps where they've moved to a different location. So yeah, I think there's a lot in it. There's a lot to unpack when you talk about hybrid.
Yeah. I think it's also a great opportunity to amplify things that people are doing where wellness is concerned, when you can't physically see it because you're not in front of each other, right? So this is where, you know, we've seen people use our platforms to show people running marathons, or, you know, we've got a recipe Slack channel, for example, where people will share healthy recipes. You can get really creative, like, you know, you have a team meeting, but everybody's out on a walk and you're just on the phone. You know, I think that there are lots of cool ways to amplify healthy behaviors when people are not necessarily physically in front of each other.
Yeah, definitely. There's great examples there as well, which I know is what people need. And setting up those kind of team rituals that you're going to have in a meeting. So, you know, every time you're coming together in a meeting, it's almost popping up the rituals that are, you know, if you're virtual, pop on your camera. If you can't pop on your camera, explain why. Like, not into every depth of detail, but like sometimes it's just the assumptions can be made as to why the camera isn't even on.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of sharing.
How can we go out for lunch or step away without it looking like you're taking advantage of the work from home setup?
Yeah, and that was the one I was referring to a little bit earlier that I saw pop in there, because, you know, again, for me, it's about, I would love to see people actually role modeling that I am stepping away at lunchtime. And actually, I block out my calendar, and I call them mindful lunch times, where I'm taking a step away from the laptop. I'm going to have my lunch and I'm going to take a walk. And of course, there are times when I have to flex and move it around a little bit. But where people are, you know, my team members know about that. And then guess what's happened? They've also put in that time and blocked it out, because they know that this is important. You have to take time away. I mentioned, you know, earlier, it's about taking the time to rest and recharge. If we don't do it, we're not going to be performing. And it's critical.
Yeah, so I think that idea of modeling is really important. because, when you see your leaders doing that behavior, it signals to you that that behavior is okay. So I think, the answer to that really is normalizing that behavior. Also, I use my calendar strategically for that. So even if you don't necessarily, to your point, see me step away, my calendar is open and you can see all the things on my calendar that I'm doing for my wellness. Now, this is kind of out there, but I go to a therapist and you can clearly see my therapist appointment on my calendar. I don't think it's something that I should be ashamed of. And so anybody can go on my calendar and see when I'm meeting with my therapist.
Yeah, I think anything anybody is doing to take care of any element of their well-being should be celebrated and shared. So, yeah.
Okay. Do you have any advice on how to focus on well-being when an organization is in a staffing crisis?
The topic that comes up a lot in discussion here for me at Cisco, and, often it feels like we're constantly being overworked and overwhelmed. And I just think that's the nature of how work has become in some ways, which is such a shame, because I do think that it's all related to behaviors actually around how we work versus the actual work that we do. So I think there is this kind of, there's a level of overwhelm with it that I think that, needs to be understood and addressed. And actually having those conversations, again, it comes back to the conversations that need to be had, and putting in place, some practical guides to help teams navigate through some of these discussions is really important. And I think, again, just, calling it out, because I think what happens a lot in organizations, particularly, large ones like ours, is, staffing challenges are probably, very much there. And I think the conversation gets exacerbated, and I'm not dismissing the fact that there will be some staffing issues that are a problem, but I think the more I hear people continuously talk about it, I think, well, let's just maybe put it to one side and actually get on with the work, because there is a lot of time spent talking about it versus getting on with the prioritization that needs to be done of the work. And how many companies are actually looking at, we did all those things 10 years ago. Are they actually practices that we need to continue to be doing? And are we doing anything with those practices that we have? Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of it is also about looking at what's the actual output and the productivity of the work the team's doing. And are there some things that perhaps can come off the plate of people that allows them to actually focus in perhaps a smaller team that they have to get the work done? But it does come up a lot, I know.
Yeah, I think it's especially important to focus on well-being when you have a staffing challenge, because a staffing challenge essentially means that you don't have enough people. And so you have to be really careful not to burn out the people that you have and not to exacerbate the staffing problem by having people quit when you're already short-staffed. So in my opinion, every time is a good time for wellness, but that is an especially critical time to focus on wellness.
I think it's funny, Michelle. I think a lot of people think that taking time on your well-being means you're taking so much time that you're not going to be working, mm-hmm. which is not what it's all about at all. Because sometimes, when you have your tool belt, if you like, of your well-being techniques around you in the day, it's literally about those 5 minutes or 2 minutes in between the meetings that help keep you going. Yep. It's not necessarily, and the more people actually can do those smaller steps throughout the day, mm-hmm. the more likely they're not going to have to take a significant period of time off due to burnout or stress or overwhelm. So, I think it's just helping understand those conversations are there, because that's sometimes why the staff shortages actually then, become a problem.
Exactly. I was so surprised that when I stepped out for lunch and came back, I was so much more focused and productive. It was a really good reminder for me. I mean, I knew intellectually, but I needed that reminder. Okay, given the time, this is probably going to be our last question. Is there a consensus guideline or benchmark of what percentage of revenue an organization should be spending on well-being?
Well, I don't have the answer to that. exactly. I think that it has absolutely, I have seen it become a priority from a business strategy perspective, and I have definitely seen organizations carve out more budget to spend on well-being. And I want to get back to my point that I made earlier around simplicity and accessibility to the well-being, to embed a conscious culture of well-being, which sometimes doesn't mean spending money on well-being initiatives. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to talk about that when we want to, maybe promote some well-being initiatives that are out there and things that people are working on in the audience. But ultimately, what I'm saying is you need to have some basic elements of well-being initiatives and offerings, but ultimately it's about the conversation and how you're embedding the culture of making sure that people know that well-being is important within the team, for the manager, for the individual that's working in the company. So yes, I think there's an element that, there needs to be a spend and budget allocated, absolutely, and it needs to be looked at in incorporation with healthcare plans. What are we doing to ensure we've got inclusive healthcare plans across the organisation? But it's not necessarily just about the massage chairs or, the fruit that's in the office anymore. It really has to be thought about. And also remembering that many different people will want different things, and you have to provide a suite of offerings that's going to support that as well. So,
yes, I love ending on that note. It is less about the money than it is about embedding it into the culture and the strategy and the fabric of an organization. And I hope that everyone got some great ideas around how to do that today, and that you will take it back to your organization. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, and thank you so much for all your engagement in the chat and in Q&A. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.